I'm going to give you 5 reasons why the North American sports tech ecosystem rocks. All right, let's jump right in. Reason number 1 why North American sports tech rocks is because the US are dominating the global sports tech landscape. And we're going to present you a few slides on that. This is the global sports tech funding over the last 5 years. And I guess I don't have to say too much about this chart. It's pretty obvious that the North American startups are rocking the stage. They accounted for an incredible 64.6% of overall global sports tech funding in the last 5 years. That's almost 2/3 of the funding. And if you look at Asia and Europe, if you combine them, then they not even have as much funding as the US have. But the question is also, who is behind that North American funding? And if you look at funding from a country perspective, you see it on the left side, the United States with about $8 billion in funding over the last 5 years in sports tech alone are dominating that scene. And if you look at China on position number 2, that's 1/4 of what the United States are accounting for. And if you look at India on position number 3, that's 1/17 of the funding that US startups achieved over the last 5 years. And another thing to highlight is, it's written in the footnotes there, is that the US accounts for 97% of funding in North America. This is outstanding. And basically, it's only Canada on position number 8 who has another meaningful contribution to the overall funding in North America. So Canada secured over $200 million in funding over the last 5 years. But it's not only the funding area where North America or the US dominates, it's also the amount of startups. So from all sports tech startups globally, 40.7% come from the United States. This is incredible. And big shout out to Canada here, by the way. We've seen Canada ranked on position number 8 for the funding in North America, globally, sorry. But Canada is actually on position number 4 when it comes to global amount of sports tech startups. So I think it's fair to say the US dominates the global sports tech landscape. Coming to point number 2 and connected to the first one, it's actually New York who is behind most of these numbers, or the majority of the funding and startups. New York is for sure the sports tech capital of the world. So New York City accounts on a global level for 22% of the global funding. This is incredible. It's one city, New York City, who contributed almost 1/4 of the world's sports tech funding over the last 5 years, 22%. And even if you add Beijing and Wuhan, little reminder here again, we are not going to mention the C word today, then you still are below New York City in global funding. So definitely the world's sports tech capital. All right, reason number 3 of 5. We've seen that the US is behind this big number of funding in sports tech. But it's important to state that it's not just New York City. We actually have multiple hotspots within the US. And if we again look at the funding amount and have a look at different states, again, New York as a state is obviously number 1. That's not surprising. But look at number 2, California. The Californian cities combine for over $2.2 billion in funding over the last 5 years. This is pretty amazing, and it's in the ballpark of the money that went into Asian sports tech, for example. But even on rank number 3, Massachusetts, with close to $800 million in funding over the last 5 years, that's half of the money that, for example, went into European sports tech over the last 5 years, just from the state of Massachusetts, and a couple of other states who are performing actually really well. Again, we're not only looking at the funding, but we're also going to look at the amount of startups from each city. So again, no surprise, New York City is city number 1 when it comes to amount of startups in North American sports tech. But one thing we have to state here is, if you look from a state perspective, it's actually California that is leading the game here. So we have San Francisco on position number 2, LA on position number 3, and a bit later we have San Diego and Santa Monica. So if you combine all of them, they are ahead of New York City. So from state perspective, California is the leading one in the US and in North America from an amount of starting perspective. And again, shout out to Canada, especially Toronto here. Toronto accounts for 3% of the North American sports tech startups and ranks on a very good position number 4. So this was reason number 3. Moving on to reason number 4, sorry. We not only have a lot of funding, we not only have a lot of startups, but we also have some outstanding companies who are actually in line with the global trends. And we spoke about this last week before, and I'm going to speak about it again this week. You might ask yourself, what are the trends in global sports tech? And if you read our reports, you will come across these themes again and again. It's fitness, content, and esports where the most money is spent in over the last 5 years. Fitness, content, esports. And now we're going to look at some companies who received the most amount of funding over the last 5 years. And we're going to do that from a view from our sports tech framework. Just to give you a quick run through, in our framework, we have 3 main areas. The green one is activity and performance. These are the solutions for whoever performs sports, who are the athletes, the people who are running, the people who exercise. That sector actually accounts for the most amount of funding with $3.2 billion US. And this is mainly driven by fitness solutions. The second sector is fans and content, $2.5 billion US over the last 5 years. This is, like the name indicates, is driven by content solutions. And last but not least, which is a bit more like a B2B play in most cases, is management and organization with 2.2 billion. So here you would find solutions for the executives who have to run clubs, leagues, a gym, a venue, and these kind of things. So the companies that you see there are the ones who raised the most amount of funding in their respective subsector within these sectors. And if we go through them, by the way, they're displayed with their all-time funding, we find the theme that I was talking about before of fitness, content, esports again and again. For example, fitness, we have Peloton, big IPO last year. ClassPass received a lot of funding over the last 24 months. But also content, Barstool Sports, a lot of funding. BAMTech Media and Management Organization, incredible companies. And also esports is represented with Discord from San Francisco in the organizations and venue subsector. So these are some outstanding companies of the last 5 years in North American sports tech. And like I said, with only a few exceptions, they fit to this content, fitness, and esports theme. All right, we're coming to an end already. This was reason number 4. We're coming to reason number 5. One of the biggest strengths of the especially US sports tech ecosystem is that there is an unparalleled investor landscape. And I'm gonna show you a map, and I think this is all I need to say basically. So look at this. If we would do this for Asia or for Europe, the map would be kind of empty. But these are investors in North American sports tech, and this is important to highlight, who are specialized on sports tech. Sometimes they also include media and entertainment as well in their focus, but they specifically mention sports and sports tech as one of their major areas of investment. And I guess I don't have to highlight too many companies here, but I mean, many of them you will know yourself. Just a few ones, maybe Sapphire Ventures in a collaboration with City Football Group. Courtside Ventures has been around for a long time. Causeway Media Partners has been very successful. And I could name a lot more, but I think I shouldn't grab out too many. Actually, I mean, Tim Hayden's going to be on this call later as well. Actually, we can also name Stadia Ventures, but we also have them on the accelerator slide. But I think it's important to state that obviously on the West Coast, on the East Coast, we have a lot of investors. You would expect that. But also, for example, in the Midwest with KB Partners and Phoenix Sports Partners, also Title Tech, closely related to the Green Bay Packers, very cool initiatives. And even though they're still young, we have Playmaker Capital in Toronto, Ontario. So also some Canadian contribution here. Cool. These are, in a nutshell, the 5 reasons why we think North American sports tech rocks. But if you joined our webinar last week already, You probably know that we also have one thing that we mentioned that we find challenging for the respective ecosystem. The most significant or most interesting one at the moment is actually that potentially North America has lost its momentum in funding. And as you can imagine, I'm going to back this up with some data. So look at these numbers. This is the amount of funding in North American sports tech over the last 5 years. And even if we include a little reporting lag, so meaning that we potentially don't have all the deals from last year yet because they're going to be announced a bit later. The last year, 2019, was the 5-year low regarding investment amount in North American sports tech. This is super surprising. And by the way, that's the same development in Asia. They didn't have a very good year there of 2019. And only Europe is, the development is contrary to that, because Europe is growing actually year over year. So that the momentum is going down a little. And this is also reflected in North America's contribution to the overall funding. So if you look at the last almost 6 years, actually, you will see that's the darkest green bars, that North America's contribution in these years to global funding was never below 55%. So in all years from 2014 to 2018, North America was the main contributor to funding globally, accounting for always more than 50%. And in 2019, for the first time, we're down to 35%. So that's only a third left. And like I said before, the development in Europe is contrary to that. So Europe had a very strong year with a contribution of 23% to global sports tech funding, and also Asia performing quite well. Sweet. This is again 5 reasons why North American sports tech rocks.